Hey, everyone. Welcome to part two of my interview with Dale Fletcher. Now, as you know, if you've watched part one, we are having a really, really intense conversation, good conversation, insightful conversation about the landscape of customs declaration software. And actually, Dale is talking about more than just declarations. He's talking about, well, in a way, technology, use of technology and software in as a whole. So he's talking about special procedures. He's talking about how do we deal with software in the context of customs warehousing and inward processing and the likes of it. So we're going to continue this trend and this very insightful conversation with Dale Fletcher in my second part, and I hope you like it today. We're going to talk about vendor responsiveness and real world applications. So I hope you enjoy. So here's my second part. And don't forget, it just starts, boom, because we stopped the interview, in after 20 minutes or so, because it was getting a little long. So I'm just introducing the second part, which starts right now.
So speaking of small businesses, while we stay on this for me, I have two questions here for you. And you mentioned it already, but let me make sure I get this right. So vendor engagement with small businesses, how do you address the issue, which I also faced a lot? And I have a lot of small and medium-sized business companies, not to say they're not, the big and complex customers as well, but for those that have a real potential to grow big, if only this customs border would go away. How do you address the issue where software providers then gauge interest based on volume of declarations rather than wishing to have? If you don't go beyond 1,000 declarations a month, we're not interested. How is that possible?
Yeah, no, that's a challenge, because often that's further down the line in the conversation. This is where I've sort of learned now what to ask ahead of time so that I can move on very quickly from these particular companies who are wanting you to jump through so many hoops. And let's not forget, they are the supplier and we are the customer. So often it feels like the other way around.
The other way around, exactly. Especially when you... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, basically, so you have to ask the certain questions so you have to sort of develop a crib sheet. But this is something I've developed through experience, having spoken to many, and I've gone back to various others, and sometimes the story has changed because these companies are evolving and what sort of customers they want to deal with and the volumes they want to deal with varies. So some of the new players start off wanting any business from anywhere. You go back to them and then you suddenly learn actually they don't want that. They just want certain types of business. C4T, as I've said, is one example of that. So that can be very frustrating where you're using your previous knowledge in your new conversation for another client and it's all changed again. Generally, I would tend to go to certain players. There are ASM is a very good organization where they are sort of partner owned. They're a not-for-profit, less sophisticated, less promises. I have to say that's a good starting point. Where it's not all bells and whistles, but it's a good solid service. They'll do smaller operations and you build from there. So obviously as you become greater number of imports and exports, potentially stay with them, or maybe then step on to more sophisticated, more integrated, bigger providers. Maybe the cost goes down, maybe the service increases, and that's, I think you just have to potentially look at it. Don't sign up for anything too long. Just use operators as a stepping stone because their services are changing all the time, and just basically do short-term contracts, but just have somebody working for you who can review what these guys are currently offering, what they don't offer you, what you should be using your customs declaration system for. And I keep on banging about custom special procedures because I can't say that enough, quite frankly. So I think it's just a case of keep an eye on what your provider is providing and what the market is providing, but you've really got to verify what the market is really providing. So find out as quickly as possible whether they'll talk to you, whether they deliver what you want them to deliver, and then move on. There's plenty coming in the marketplace. I don't think they'll all survive. There's too many coming in right now, and I think it's very, very difficult for them to differentiate, and partly because of their own communication.
Well, I liked what I was saying in one of the videos. There's one company called Customs Declarations UK, and they just do that, and because it's in their name, like how easy and simple is that, right? And then you know what you're getting right away. It's a customs declaration. It's no fancy bells and whistles, at least yet, but it's just that, right? So for standard procedures like RoRo from say Germany to the UK or vice versa, that's it, right? No bells and whistles here. But yeah, I get your point about the integrators and the large. Can I ask you about vendor responsiveness? That's a big one for me. I've said it in many videos. I generally am working on my patience on anything, so I want to be more respectful of not having to rush things, but sometimes waiting longer than 5, 6, 7 hours for a response from a software provider when there's a computer says no moment is a bit challenging with shipments on the way. So although I try to patient myself, there's a point where I just need a response, and I can't be asked to create yet another ticket, which then will be responded to or issue resolved without the issue being resolved. So about vendor responsiveness, how do you deal with slow response time and the need to constantly follow up with customs declaration software provider? Is this just me, or what's your experience?
No, this whole ticket system, I don't know whether it's a throwback from COVID. I mean, many businesses suffer from it. I mean, even when you contact them as a new customer. I think the way I deal with it is just go and use my contacts as much as possible, get to know as many parties within the organization as senior as possible, and shout. I'm afraid, we've kind of all had to do it when we buy and sell a house in the UK with our solicitors. You shout and you get put to the top of the pile. So I'm afraid it's no different now. It seems to be rife. I don't think a lot of software companies are particularly good at funnily enough customer communication.
I've had no interview where at that question they didn't say we are very responsive and we respond immediately. But there are some that say to me, I respond personally. And that for me was different, because you could, you will find some that you can call and they will actually pick up, or say, I'll call you back. I even got one on WhatsApp. I can't believe it. It's like, wow. Yeah. Anyway, good.
If I could just add to that, again, sure. I would say the smaller operator is better than the larger operator. And that's across the board. I think you can get lost in many of these bigger companies. So I think actually if you can possibly compromise a little and go smaller business, I would always try and do that. You speak to people who have more influence, who have greater access to more senior people, and the responses are just better. You just have to be very, very careful when you send the communication in. You're not even sure whether that person's on holiday, whether they're sick, they're in meetings all day. So that's where if I have a slight feeling something isn't being responded to fast enough, or even if straight away I'm in slight doubt, just send another message to somebody else. I mean, you're not dropping anybody in. You are the customer. You need an answer, whether it's a new inquiry or whether you've signed up to these guys and there's a service issue. So don't ever be afraid to over communicate to get what you need to do your job. Ultimately, you are responsible for getting the job done, and we are responsible for our clients to make sure everything happens as it should happen. So I do not accept companies letting me down, because otherwise I'm just letting my clients down.
Correct. You said something very interesting. I'm so keen to get your sheet. You've got this sheet where you know what questions to ask during the initial discussions. I'm so hopeful that after that we can do this interview. We can work together to produce a publicly facing support sheet that we could add in the show notes maybe below. We'll have a chat about that. Something, there's some top tips questions, because what's crucial to me is the initial discussion, right? We can't go to everyone. So I'm already doing these interviews for some of my clients and those watching this video, so that you don't have to do it. You get a first impression when you listen to these interviews about what these people are all about. And but the initial discussions, you said there are some questions that you just need to place at the beginning. So can you share a specific example, maybe if you have one, where a provider software did not meet the expectations during the initial discussions? And is there any red flag that you could recommend to anybody having these discussions?
Well,
or
I think
green flags, for that matter. You
I
could
think
do
it,
green flags as well.
I think a very obvious well, first of all, to check with companies, do they offer what they are telling you in their marketing in your market? So if you're in the UK, for instance, as I've had with Wisec, do you provide e-commerce software that connects into the warehouse system, that then connects into the customs software? That's promised in hard copy, and I'm afraid they just don't. So really, you've got to check out the very first thing, whatever they're telling you, please just verify and almost get it confirmed in writing from the outset that they are delivering what they are promising, because invariably they too often will tell you, well, we do it for these markets, but we haven't quite got it for this market, or we have a partner who can do that for you. Well, that's another conversation, that's another load of cost, and that partner then needs to connect. Who's paying for connection? Who's going to guarantee connection? And so many companies say, "Oh, you can plug into ours." Yes, but what's involved in a plugin? Plugin is just used as a very simple word for you, Mr. Customer. I've got another load of hassle to organise knowledge, let alone cost, to actually get that plugin working properly. And any breakdown in either of the systems, as I said before, can so easily be blamed on the connection, and that scares me silly very often.
Yeah,
so that would be one of my red flags, just checking that they really do integrate their whole service.
So we got integration, we got, do they offer what they preach?
In this market, so you've got to check where they may be communicating that they do all these things, but what markets do they do them in? And if you are able to sort of specify specific markets you're importing or from or exporting to, and you really want as much integration as you possibly can, so that you're not necessarily, for instance, I often want to try and set up customs software in other countries to then allow us to control that other country we're going into and coming out of. And so you've really got to be very, very precise in your script as to what it is you want to achieve. Assume absolutely nothing, and make sure that you've got the right people within that organization spelling out very clearly what they can and cannot do. What's the time frame? How much is it going to cost? What other parties are involved? So for instance, there are companies like Descartes who can provide, who I know you've got a lot of experience with. But the timeline sometimes, for getting some of these processes done can completely put the project, out of the ballpark. So it could be 4 months for them to connect custom software with, for instance, customs warehouse software. They can do it, but I'm afraid the limited specialists they've got to do that means that it can totally put, with one of my clients, they went off, they lost interest, quite frankly, because it was going to push it into next year, and they had investments to make. They wanted to grow their business really quickly, group of young men, very ambitious, going places, and I'm afraid Descartes completely let us down. They were keen on going on that direction because it was one of the plugins with one of their systems already. So they felt that was a good way to go. But when they started to hear these dates, and also some of the huge costs involved, even though it was supposed to be some sort of integrated system, absolute nonsense.
Wow.
And that's kind of embarrassing for me, because you kind of take one on this path, and you always get a long way down before you actually realise, this is a complete waste of money, and they're paying for my money. I mean, I often have to write off my costs
Well,
because you do not like charging clients for things that go nowhere.
we actually, as advisors and supporters, have this role where we have to give the filter through the, I almost said BS, but the filter through what actually matters, and then if that's why we need the clarity. And also this survey is supposed to help in this direction, and it's a minefield for sure, but somebody's got to do it, as you say. Tell me a little bit another aspect that I am very interested to hear your view on: user friendliness versus compliance. I mean, I don't even know if there's verses here, but it's probably user friendliness and compliance. So do you have any concerns regarding the trend of making customs declaration software more user friendly? Is that something that you would welcome, right? To make it as easy to understand as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I smile there because you've hit on a really, really very important point. AI in particular is in theory going to make software something that customer software something that everybody can use.
Yeah.
The problem is, as one of my accountants many years ago said to me in one of my businesses, you can use these software systems, but unless you understand what you're putting in, unless you understand if something goes wrong, why it's gone wrong, where you can find the problem, I'm afraid you're in big, big trouble, because it's going to cost you an awful lot of money to really sort the problem out. And potentially where you're involved with taxation issues, duty issues, VAT issues, you will be picked up in due course sooner rather than later nowadays. And you've got to provide a defense, which will cost you an awful lot of money, because you've got to investigate and find out using specialists like us to find out where that problem is. And you better stump up the money pretty damn quick that you probably haven't allowed for in your business plan, in your cash flow forecast at all. So these are major issues where the easier it gets for companies to use these systems, the less knowledge the people will have, the staff will have, actually inputting the data in. And also knowing, other people, what other parties, a lot of people do not realize that, yes, you may employ third parties, but you are responsible as an end company employing these businesses, be they international distribution companies, parcel companies. You are responsible for the compliance of the entire process. Even if they create the data, that's got to come back to you. Now, if you've got somebody who inputs, especially in an SME, but it may be a younger person with limited experience in a large company, who's just transferring data straight into a system that's very easy to do, and it's generating answers. AI is generating answers. It may be fairly early in the process, and it's still learning those answers. Who is checking to make sure the answers the machine is producing, the software is producing, is actually correct? We seem to think it's a magic pill. It's not. When we're all learning, we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes anyway. It doesn't matter how good you are. Obviously, you make less mistakes, but there's going to be a lot of learning through AI, and it's still got to be verified. So I really worry the easier it becomes to use these systems. It's only so many clicks, and that's all. It's going to take 5 minutes. But quite frankly, it's disguising what is a very complex process. And there are lots of different areas that could be incorrect. And these are not going to be picked up until a long way down the line. And who's going to pick them up? It'll probably be HMRC with many businesses.
So that's really interesting, because I'm looking at quite a few softwares now, and it's true, they give you the box for please input the data in this box, and then they say, well, I'll give you the box and I'll make it as easy as possible. That's surely something you must welcome. And I am not responsible for what you put in. I just make it as easy as possible. So are you saying that we need almost like a little warning, or when you do simplify and you offer software, is there a responsibility for software houses to let people know that this may look simple, but actually you really ought to get some proper advice and some training in order to make sure you input the right data? Is there a role? Because otherwise it could be like, here's my software, look how easy it is, go. And shall we say, here's my software, look how easy it is. Before you go, learn to walk first. Is that fair?
Really interesting angle on that. I personally think it's down to UK government to make sure that anybody involved in inputting in what is very important data, claiming what they should and shouldn't be paying, which even comes down to a tariff code, because obviously that's a fundamental data code which verifies what you should and shouldn't be paying. That should be a job for somebody who is trained and approved and checked by UK government. And so therefore I feel it is a responsibility of the end client to make sure the person putting the information in knows what they're doing. Now, of course, for the software companies to provide a facility that makes it super efficient so that that qualified person is not costing a company an absolute fortune, but that person knows what they're putting in, but using a really user-friendly software system, they become that much more efficient. Absolutely fantastic. It's a win-win. The right information's going in, it's being checked, pre-checked, it's being post-checked. The system is not fighting you. You're not having to re-input it a dozen times as some of the old processes we've had to do. It's copying and pasting, and that's great if the original data going in was checked, and it can be checked again. But I'm afraid this is something, unfortunately, there's no one saying there has to have this knowledge to use these super friendly, in theory, fronts to these systems. The reality is they are just fronts. Behind the lovely user-friendly front is a very complex machine. And I do worry, especially when there are things like AI, which is a learning mechanism that's teaching itself, that quite frankly, it's going to be producing an awful lot of rubbish.
Well, we are going to stop it here because we are now getting to the really, really interesting bit, and that's the future of custom declaration software or custom software and AI, the role of AI. And you've heard Dale is not that much as a friend a friend of AI. Now, I've seen AI quite do a lot of good. I can only say I've seen it do a lot of good. That doesn't mean you have to trust it blindly, but yeah, it looks good. Anyway, so we're gonna leave it here for part 2 of our interview with Dale, and there's one more part to come, and I hope you'll join me for that as well. So thank you for watching. Please don't forget, like, comment, and share. Again, I can't stress this enough. This is the way we're gonna get more people to get the answers to the questions they want. So if you could please do that, it would help the channel out, and it would give more people a chance of seeing this content for no charge. So please do it. Thank you very much. See you in part 3.